So why am I talking about a mythological creature? The same reason I talk about any mythological creature today. It's fun, it's interesting, it's mysterious and thrilling. It conjures up thoughts and ideas of the unknown. Even something that we know has to be completely made up, it is not really completely made up. There always seems to be some origin of these ideas, right? And this also seems to be the case with many of the creatures we find in monster movies. Come to think of it, I don't know if there is any monster that I've seen in a movie that is not based on some type of ancient lore. Now, in 1926, horror writer H.P. Lovecraft wrote a short story called The Call of Cthulhu. This story was written in a documentary style with 3 separate narratives based on the narrator's discovery of notes left behind from a deceased relative. In the first narration, The Horror in Clay, Cthulhu is introduced as a statue. It represented a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. This thing, which seemed instinct with a fearsome and unnatural malignancy, was of a somewhat bloated corpulence, and squatted evilly on a rectangular block or pedestal, covered with undecipherable characters. The book introduces the Cthulhu cult, who awaits the beast's return. Hidden in distant wastes and dark places all over the world until the time when the great priest Cthulhu, from his dark house in the mighty city of Arli, under the waters, should rise and bring the earth again beneath his sway. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, his creature, is inspired by Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem, The Kraken. There hath he lain for ages and will lie, battening on huge sea worms in his sleep, until the latter fire shall heat the deep. Then once by man and angels to be seen, in roaring he shall rise, and on the surface die. Now, before I go any further, did you notice the reference to something prophetic? Until the latter fire shall heat the deep. This poem is talking about a creature that occupies the deepest part of the oceans, eating sea worms until the day when the ocean floor heats up so much that it drives this creature to the surface. And I think I have talked about this before with volcanism and what's happening right now with the oceans heating up. How anything living deep in the oceans would either die, adapt, or have to relocate. The Leviathan described in the Bible. Now this is interesting because this is obviously the same creature, different rendering. I am sure many people would consider Howard Phillips Lovecraft to be an occultist, but he was really an atheist and materialist. His knowledge of the occult and magic came from books and bits and pieces of information, even his well-known and dark creation, the Necronomicon. The 9 gates are all part of this lore, which is based on several elements concocted together to form some of his writings. He also mixed many of his dreams into his writings. His writings soon became a lore of their own, and even his ideas about magic would be adopted into many mainstream occult practices. But Lovecraft's writings have had the largest influence on Hollywood. If you have ever seen a Lovecraftian type of film, TV show, or writing, many people are familiar with the cosmic horror elements that are normally used, and you can pull those elements apart and see how mainstream those ideas are. But our focus here is this creature. The latest adaptation of the Cthulhu creature, I believe, was in the 2020 action horror film Underwater. Unlike many other films, this does not hint at Cthulhu. No, this is a straightforward film centered around this massive titan from beginning to end. The reason I bring this up is because it is the closest live-action rendering I could find of the creature taking place deep in the ocean. It is a good take on the scale and power of Cthulhu while adding some spiritual or alien-like elements to the monster. In Norse mythology, the kraken is described as a giant tentacle monster, not really a squid or octopus, because that would be just a giant squid or giant octopus. The kraken is described as being much, much bigger. Tentacles over a mile long in some descriptions, a creature so large that it could be mistaken for an island. And the legend is that it would attack and devour anything near it, including ships and sailors. Now, what I found interesting was that there is an old Norwegian text, or what could even be called an old scientific journal called The King's Mirror, dating back to the year 1250. It was intended to be educational literature for the young King Magnus from his father, King Haakon. In this text, he describes politics, morality, merchants, the clergy, the peasants. He also discusses wildlife. He discusses a variety of fish and a variety of whales, as well as the marvels of the Icelandic waters, many of which exist today or did exist. Then he brings up the kraken, and it reads, "There is a fish not yet mentioned, which it is scarcely advisable to speak about on account of its size, which to most men will seem incredible. There are, moreover, but very few who can tell anything definite about it, inasmuch as it is rarely seen by men. For it almost never approaches the shore or appears where fishermen can see it. And I doubt that this sort of fish is very plentiful in the sea. In our language, it is usually called the kraken. I can say nothing definite as to its length in ells, an ell which is 18 inches, for on those occasions when men have seen it, it has appeared more like an island than a fish. Nor have I ever heard that one has ever been caught or found dead. It seems likely that there are but two in all the ocean, and that these beget no offspring. For I believe it is always the same ones that appear. Nor would it be well for other fishes if they were as numerous as the other whales, seeing that they are so immense and need so much food. It is said that when these fishes want something to eat, they are in the habit of giving forth a violent belch, which brings up so much food that all sorts of fish in the neighborhood, both large and small, will rush into the hope of getting nourishment and good fare. Meanwhile, the monster keeps its mouth open. The fishes cannot help crowding in great numbers, but as soon as its mouth and belly are full, the monster closes its mouth and thus catches and shuts in all the fishes that just previously had rushed in eagerly to seek food. Something else that I found interesting about the King's Mirror is that there is a description of a wild man or werewolf in the text. There was another text put together by a Swedish zoologist, botanist, and physician, Carl Linnaeus, in 1735 entitled The System of Nature, a science book, which has the entry of the kraken in it. Linnaeus classified the kraken as a cephalopod with the scientific name Microcosmus marinus, again inhabiting the seas of Norway. although Linnaeus never saw the monster. So later on, the kraken was removed from the text, and any reference to a kraken from that point on would be considered a giant squid, and it was left at that. Keep in mind, back then, they used to place giant sea creatures on old sea maps, among other creatures, which would be similar to placing an image of Bigfoot on a national park map. If you look through several of these ancient stories about a massive sea creature, there is this great battle. In the Old Testament, Leviathan is a giant multi-headed sea dragon that is killed by God and served as food for the Hebrews in the wilderness. Which is interesting because God does cause a source of food to rain down from heaven, but of manna and quail, or was it really minced Leviathan meat? I mean, although fish meat is not typically what quails eat, they can eat it, and they may have been attracted to such a meal if there was nothing else around to eat. And all this means there is no more Leviathan, or there is more than one, or Cthulhu represents an entirely different creature altogether. The Japanese kaiju is simply a strange creature, or any giant creature really, and kaiju has now become sort of a genre over there. With that said, Cthulhu is another version of Godzilla. The rendering of an idea that there may be some type of giant monster that has not yet been seen by modern man in the deepest, darkest corners of our oceans, waiting for the day to emerge and wreak havoc on the surface. Now, to me, the more realistic version of this is, if a giant monster did surface, whether that be a giant octopus or squid or hydra or humanoid Cthulhu creature, and when I say giant, I mean skyscraper size. If something like that did surface from the bottom of the ocean, I am thinking that it would probably surface, let out a big roar for everyone to hear, and then it dies on the shore for the entire world to tune in and see. And once everyone sees this thing on their TVs and mobile devices, or at ground zero, this would be a world-changing event, and governments around the world would have a lot of questions to answer. Not only that, this would bring a new fear upon the face of the earth. Honestly, if the earth changes that much that it drives a Godzilla-like monster to the surface, I think at that point, monsters would be the least of our problems. There is more to come, folks. Stay tuned. More on gods and monsters. Until then, be sure to visit woodwardentertainment.com and the Woodward Entertainment Store. God bless everyone. Stay awake, stay aware, stay safe. And I will talk to you all very soon.